Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to episode 7 of 143 Collectors Corner. We are in Formula One territory today, so let's get straight into it. An iconic car from the 90s. Do you know who Eddie Jordan is? If you watch F1, chances are you do. Well, you may not know Eddie Jordan was once a very average racing driver. But clearly he was not a man content with just a mediocre racing career. He wanted to manage a mediocre racing team too. Okay, that's perhaps a little bit harsh. Let's maybe say he achieved some success here and there during his 14 years in Formula One as a constructor. A third place once. That's not too bad. Well, it all started in 1991 with this ravishing beauty, the Jordan 191.
Oh yeah!
It was designed by Gary Anderson, a highly experienced technical guru who had previously worked for McLaren as well as in Formula 3000 and IndyCar, to name a few. 7up were brought in as primary sponsors, giving the car its iconic green paint job, and Jordan then managed to convince Fujifilm, who had a similar green in their branding, to partner with him as well. Now, for many people, perhaps your non-diehard F1 fans, the regular crowd who take a little bit more interest than a drunk man at a pub, this car is most famous for being the first drive of Michael Schumacher in Formula One, and that's quite a noble title. However, Schumacher was not a regular driver for the team in 1991. Jordan enlisted two experienced drivers to fill the cockpit: Italian Andrea De Cesaris and Belgian Bertrand Gachot, a name I probably just butchered because I didn't look it up beforehand. Now, back in 1991, kids, there was a flurry of teams wanting to race in F1. And so some teams had to pre-qualify just for the privilege of taking part. Essentially, they had to qualify in order to qualify. So being a brand new team, Jordan fell into this category. And being a brand new team, the year did not start very strongly. But it must be said, a fair amount of poor results can be attributed to mechanical failures rather than poor pace. Not all of them though. At the first race of 1991 in Phoenix, Cesaris failed to qualify for the race at all, which is unfortunate. And in the races that followed, the Brazilian GP and the San Marino GP, results were hardly stellar, although there were signs of pace. It was at the fourth race of the season in Montreal where the 191 showed real challenge, finishing 4th for Cesaris and 5th for Gachot. This was followed by more points in Mexico and France. Soon, Jordan had scored enough points to avoid pre-qualifying, and things were looking good. And then, disaster struck. With 6 races left in the season, Gachot received a 2-month prison sentence for spraying CS gas, which is basically tear gas, at a taxi driver in London. That is its own interesting story, and I will leave a link in the description if you want to read more about it. But with the Belgian no longer available, Jordan needed somebody to fill the cockpit for the remaining races of 1991. And this is where history happens. For the driver he hired was a young German named Michael Schumacher. Schumacher drove only one race for Jordan, the Belgian Grand Prix at Spa. He immediately displayed the talent and pace so many have come to know him for today, putting his 191 in 7th place on the grid. How sad then that mechanical issues once again plagued the team, and Schumacher suffered a clutch failure within minutes of the race starting. Schumacher's raw pace had been enough that the Benetton team signed him almost immediately, much to Jordan's displeasure. However, this signing ejected Roberto Merino from his Benetton seat, and Jordan duly roped him in for 2 races, before offering the seat to Alessandro Zanardi for the final 3 races of the season. And so, as the 1991 season came to a close, Jordan finished 5th in the Constructors with 13 points. Now that might sound like peanuts, but remember, points were awarded very differently in 1991 compared to modern F1. And so, despite my earlier sarcasm about Eddie Jordan and his mediocre racing career, His team served up a solid debut in 1991. Unsurprisingly, the 191 was replaced in 1992 with the very creatively named 192. This model is part of the Formula One car collection, which is the same collection the Renault R25 from episode 3 comes from. These collections are normally inexpensive, and for that reason quality control can be a bit suspect. One model can be sublime, while the next one is absolutely awful and poorly made. I have been genuinely happy with my Formula One collection, and I'm also happy with the way these models are presented. The slope of the base, the height of the lid, and the angle of the model itself make them very displayable, even when they're stacked on top of each other. Most of the cars in this collection do look good. Formula One cars do have a flair for beauty, so it is all rather pleasing when it's up against my wall. But what about when you view it up close? Well, I only ever take these cars out of their boxes to photograph them, so that's really my first opportunity to inspect the build quality. And with the Jordan 191, I am pleased to report my one seems to have been built on a good day at the factory. The iconic green job is captured with richness and without blemish. Decals are clear, even the smaller ones. A car this size will never have the same decal crispness of, say, a 118 model, but these are more than adequate for the scale. Being that the Jordan 191 is from an era where F1 cars were simpler, this model has less wing and attachments, and as a result it actually feels pretty sturdy and very well built. It's also pleasing to note that the model stands perfectly horizontal on its four wheels, and it can freewheel without a hitch. Not that important for a mounted model, but it's good to know that it is able to do so. The only Formula One models I have in my collection are the ones from this relatively inexpensive collection. It seemed foolish to purchase others when I didn't know what would arrive as part of the subscription, and I do like how these all match. It looks very uniform, and the slightly OCD part of me loves that. But if you're looking to get into collecting, and maybe you're looking at this set, you're probably going to find some negative information about them on the internet. And granted, the build quality of these models is inconsistent, as I mentioned earlier. But what I would say is, if you are a collector and you spot one of these in the market, give it a close look. Don't concern yourself with the fact that it isn't a Mini Jamps or a Spark or an Auto Art. If it looks good, and more importantly, if it makes you happy, that's really all that matters. I love my collection, and I love my 191. It's one of my favorite Formula One cars when based purely on appearance, and the model is the same for me.